So I'd just like to introduce Wintana, or introduce the rest of the panel. Hope you enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Stacey. So she pretty much just introduced what this series is about, but the purpose of it is to really just explore and celebrate Black creators in Melbourne, because I feel like as of recent, we've really been contributing towards the culture, so I just wanted to shine a light on what everyone is doing. Today's conversation is about finding your voice in your art. This is probably the best way that I could have phrased it, but really it's about finding direction in what you do. So I know we have some nurses in the room, we've got some people who just do different things than here. So it's not, when I say art, it's not always specific to being a creative. You know, it really extends out to whatever you do, whatever your passion is. So I hope you all came with an open mind, because we have an amazing panel here that are going to really just shed light on their journey. So I'm going to introduce, first we have Titan, who is a recording artist, who's an advocate for the community. If you live in the West, you probably know him. And he does you do podcasting and YouTube, a bit of both. I have Jesse as well, so she is an illustrator, a writer, and a visual artist, and then Tig, who is a director and a writer. I'm going to stop talking and let you guys introduce yourselves a little bit more. Tell us, what work you do and what inspires the work that you do.
Thank you. Is this on?
I think so. Is it? No. Maybe slide it up.
Check. I can speak anyway.
So I do a lot of music type work, so recording artist stuff, working in the community in terms of projects, things that I think we're lacking, or any potholes that are in our community. I feel like it's up to us to kind of fill in and for us to help our own people. So I highlight a lot of that type of work. I have a company with my friends that's media based, because back then media wasn't treating us properly. So we said, why don't we make our own media platform, and we kind of decide the stories that we want to share and elevate, so it's not just this negative history and negative stories being repeated to our community. And yeah, that's basically it.
I'm Jesse. So I'm a visual artist mainly, but I also express myself through other mediums like writing and sort of like doing YouTube videos, sort of doing a similar thing to Titan, trying to put a spotlight on, our local community, Melbourne creatives, particularly creatives, Black creatives and creatives of colour. I think what inspires me, I guess my motivation to draw and to write definitely comes from wanting to translate my own experiences, and it's my way of processing and expressing those, and I think indirectly through doing that I find that they oftentimes resonate with other people and kind of echo the sentiments of the community around me. So I think that's always kind of the core goal of what I do, but I think also in trying to kind of pursue becoming a career artist, I want to develop like a studio and spaces like this that just really celebrate and emphasize the work of Black creatives here in Melbourne, because I think it's a little bit of a underrepresented but really strong and really massive community. That's like a bit of what motivates me.
Hey guys, I'm Tig. I'm a filmmaker, and I have been for the past 5 years, but I think stories is something that I've always done. I think I've always written stories from like beginning, middle, end, and it's always been something that I've loved. And I guess I was probably 19 years old, 20 when I realized it was like a potential career. Like I didn't even realize that at all. And I think that's a lot with young creatives, is like you don't even understand that like your potential, your pathway is like a potential to like feed you. I went to like a maths and science sort of high school, and I've got supportive parents, but my parents just like, they just want me to try hard in something, but they can't say, hey, try to do this, try to do that, try to do this. And I think it was about 19, 20 years old when I met a photographer, a Tonga Tem, I'm sure many of you guys will know her, and I'm like, what you can actually like do this with your life, and that can be your life, is like create things. And so since meeting Tom, I've taken storytelling seriously, and the way that I tell my stories is via filmmaking. And I think my ancestors have been telling stories for the past 40,000 years, and I'm just continuing that pathway in a different medium, a medium that's only been around for, let's say, 200 years. What inspires me? I think for me in my films, it's more or less when I feel like highly emotional, how I digest that. I just write. It doesn't matter, highly emotional, can be really happy, can be really sad, you know, and that's how I process things. I write at the beginning and end. Let's say, for example, what's the latest emotion I've been feeling? I think maybe jealousy. And then I've got this character that's experiencing jealousy, and then after I write it, I no longer feel that emotion. And yeah, that's me, that's what I do, and yeah, it inspires me.
I'm curious to know about this one. Who do you all create your work for? And let me elaborate on it. Do you feel like you have like a sense of responsibility to the culture, to the community? You know, especially like Tig and Titan, you do a lot of like, you do music and then you have your films. Do you feel like you need to create something that's relatable, or is it always your personal experience when you do your work?
I feel like it changes all the time.
Yeah.
With music and film, right? I'll speak more to the music side. It's not like it's one project and then it's over. You have a lot of stories. There's millions of stories to tell. I can write about anything. I can write about this moment now. And it's not just saying that in this room, we're all in the same room, but we all have different perspectives of this moment right now. And that's the same thing when you're doing music. I can say that I came here and I had a good day, I had this, I had that, and that's for me. But then I can also flip it and go, cool, let me write from the perspective of the audience, right? And change that, and then it might be a different type of story, you know? But when I make my music, when I make my music, and the funnest times that I have making my work, it's when I'm doing it for me. Like I'm just writing my stories, or I'm just getting an emotion out, or I'm having fun with something, or I have an idea and I go, cool, I have to get that down. But then I also realize that over the years, as I've been doing this, that there's people that consume that type of work as well. And what I say does impact like a lot of like, especially the younger kids, because they're impressionable. And then when you have that realization, that's when you start to think about, okay, cool, I'm having fun saying this, and I mean this and stuff, but how is that being perceived by the audiences consuming my work? And a lot of that audience is people that look like me. So how is that impacting them on a daily, and just their opinions or their view of the world, or just school life, or anything that I'm talking about? I might pass that stage, so I might be making music in year 12 or year 11, talking about that perspective in a way where I'm not thinking about the consequences of saying reckless thoughts, and how someone else, after I pass that stage of my life, is going to consume that music that is at that stage of their life, and how they're going to view it or how they might act from it. So you can't make music for other people or art for other people, because it's going to impact your story and your truth, and it's going to impact your work and your legacy at the end of it, because you weren't being honest. You were trying to make something that people want to hear, rather than something that you feel like people should hear, or something you wanted to say. Like, I don't want to ever be in a position where I'm saying something because that's what people want to hear, and then now that's my legacy, or that's the story and the truth that I pushed out, but that's not really the truth for me, you know? I'm going to be honest with it, but it's just now I'm in a stage where I finish my work, and then I listen back to it and I go, cool, now let me actually think about the consequences of this, or the positives, the negatives, and should I still release it? If not, I can just listen to my music myself, and I always do. If I have my headphones in, I'm listening to me. Like, yeah.
That's like so true. There's like a kind of constant tension as an artist to whether, you know, you're creating something for yourself, or especially in kind of this time where, you know, a lot of issues and a lot of kind of like the bigger implications of everything is more accessible to all of us. So we all feel a kind of responsibility to, you know, put out things that, you know, reflect the best of our communities and all this kind of thing. I think, like, I ask myself that question constantly, and like Titan reference, it's very fluid, the answer. But I think for me, I don't draw too much of a distinction between creating for self and creating for others, because I've always found that me kind of expressing my experiences authentically and sort of translating them into a format that other people can access and sort of interpret and kind of contextualize in a way, I find that ultimately serves your community. For instance, I think one of my goals as, like, you know, a black person in Australia, to be honest, a black person in the West, it just, you know, I think, and just as a person, I think, like, is to be the presence that younger me would have loved to see, you know? And I think that isn't necessarily asking of me to always create things with this really, like, defined definition and intention, but it's more just like existing in this space and expressing your experiences does reflect your community. And I think that from that, you tend to draw out similarities between people, you tend to draw out common goals, and from that you can build into even more of like a more formalized, like, experience. But I think it all starts from just creating, like, as yourself, and yeah, I think putting too much of that pressure on it from the beginning, it's like, I'm going to create something that's impactful, I'm going to create something that's just, it's like, you know, it never hits, and it never has the same longevity as the things you just made that might have reflected a moment. But, you know, you also never know when other people are going to come into contact with your work. So you could make something that is reflective of this week. I felt really, to take the example, jealous. And then, you know, you sort of process that emotion, you get the art out there. But someone might read that piece 2 years in the future, and they're in a different headspace, and they interpret it, and they reuse it, they use it differently, but you've ultimately still impacted other people, and it's not so self-serving. But I don't know, it's all about balance, I think, and I know that's not really a yes or no answer, but I don't think those two things are actually in odds with each other, making for self and making for others, because I feel like, yeah, ultimately you do create for others when you are yourself. I've had it's really nice moments where, like, my younger, like, family or, like, black girls, like, in a similar context, that say liked things like, I love comics, and that's not something you really see reflected, is, like, you know, black girls who like, you know, supposedly nerdy stuff, you know what I mean? It's a huge community, but it's just not very reflected. And I think literally I started, like, talking about them on my Instagram and stuff, just expressing myself, and through that I was surprised at how many people, sort of a community kind of gathered around what I was just expressing. And so from that comes this, like, and those have the power to go into platforms and all this other stuff, but it essentially just is down to you being yourself, especially as a black person, because we don't get permission to just be ourselves. We always have to be ourselves in relation to this, or be different degrees of ourselves, or kind of compartmentalize different aspects of ourselves. And I think that it's a very powerful thing to be a black person, or any other kind of minority, or any other kind of, like, different experience. It's very powerful to just be that loudly, because you will ultimately reflect more people than you realize. Yeah, sorry, that was really lengthy.
Mine's similar to what Jesse touched on. I make films for my younger self, I think. So I think, and I look at myself about 16 years old, like my baby sister's age right now, is that I make films that, if I was to consume that film when I was 16 years old, I wanted to improve my experience. Whether that means something is, whether it's beautiful in terms of, like, you can be proud to be black and here's a black story, or if it's something like you're allowed to be a black person and make bad decisions and not be a bad person. You know, and that's who the stories I make for. So if 16-year-old Tig was to watch this, then 16-year-old typically feel better about themselves, feel better about the world. And I think, yeah, that's what, and I don't mean to like, everything I make it not just about me, it's really not. But I think it's, if a younger me was to consume that, I think I'd hope that my life would be better. And because that's what films have done for me, most definitely. Most definitely, I have consumed content that has made me feel so much better about life. So excited about life, so happy to be who I am, and that I think that's the essence, that's the power of film, and I think it's really, really powerful medium. But also, I make films for people that are closest to my life, So I made a film about my mother. I just finished a film about best friendship. It's the people that are closest to my life, people that evoke emotion. People that evoke emotion in my life, I make films for, and not yet have I made like a love story about an ex, but soon. I've already started writing it.
Sorry, I just thought of something as Tig was elaborating, and I think also, I realise that I use a lot of the time the language of art, or I use the language of, the Black experience to kind of make this point. But I think the beautiful thing is that, anyone expressing themselves freely, creatively or not, as a Black person or not, there's something universal about certain aspects of the human experience that are applicable to everybody. So I think that whole kind of, I imagine as a filmmaker you've probably come into contact with that whole you don't want to get boxed into just creating Black stories. Do you know what I mean? You're just making stories at the same time. You're making them as yourself. So yes, that is something that informs it, but it's not the only thing that it is.
That's why I was asking, do you feel that sense of responsibility to only create that kind of work? But I love that you both said, we'll just turn my mic on, that you're creating something that your younger self wanted to see. I can really agree with that. And I think a lot of us growing up in Australia know that it wasn't like what it is now growing up, and there's still a lot of work to do, but to be able to create these platforms now, it's I would have had a lot of reassurance and security growing up, knowing that, there is space for me. But Jesse, you did do a little good segue into my next question. Were you going to say something too? Okay, no, so like you said, it's not, this is even this conversation today is extended to a lot of people. It's not just creatives. And I think for a lot of us, stepping into your craft, following your passion, or just even going into unfamiliar settings can be really daunting or just really confronting sometimes, because personally for myself, a lot of the times, even just creating this podcast and putting my own opinion out there, I'm just who cares? Or why do you have that, who gave you that authority to go and give this advice? Or it's just kind of, you always dealt with that little voice in your head that's kind of telling you that, that makes you doubt yourself, So I want to know, how have you all, or if you have dealt with the imposter syndrome, how have you dealt with it? How do you overcome the fear of the imposter syndrome, and also, continue to produce your work confidently?
I think that's such a good question. And personally, for me, I think what I do is I simply make things that I want to consume, and that's how I keep it like that. And even filmmaking itself, I was 18, 19 years old, and I said, Tig, what do you think is the number one coolest job you could have? What is even if your job is to I don't know, just sit down 10 hours a day, if you could do anything in the world, what is the coolest thing you can do? And I said, make films. I think that's the coolest thing. So then for me, it's, I'm not too concerned with others. I've never seen a film like this. I want to watch a film like this, so I'm gonna make it. And that's how I look at it, At the moment, I just finished writing a web series for ABC, and it's just, I'm like, oh, there's this story that's in my head. it's nothing like I really have seen before. And for me, it's not so much that I even want to make it, I want to watch it.
Yeah.
So therefore, like, fuck, no one else is making it, so I just have to do it now. Fuck, like, that's the vibes. Like,
So you never feel a little bit anxious stepping into doing it, or have you always just felt that, like, that confidence in doing your work?
I don't think I feel anxious because it's so much time alone.
Yeah.
So much time, like writing and doing this. I just spend so many hours on every single project that I do, and I work with such a small team as well that afterwards, after like 6 months of every single day in this project, I'm like, take it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's passion.
Yeah, for real.
I think for me, like in response to the whole, do I experience imposter syndrome? It's like, yes, every other day. Even things like this, I think I was like talking to my mum about it in the car, we was kind of unpacking it. I think it's, I feel like imposter syndrome is something that you should hope to have an antidote for, but not a cure. Because I think that any person who's kind of invested in improving themselves, improving their craft, will always have a degree of imposter syndrome, because you're always looking to be better, and you might be surrounding yourself with people that are better than you or in a different stage of their career than you, and I think it's what you translate that imposter syndrome into rather than the experiencing it itself. I wouldn't bash anybody for experiencing imposter syndrome. It's so easy to, like me, I have it all the time because I love to consume the work of people who I admire. So, and I feel like when I occasionally am blessed enough to kind of, share space with them, or even things like this, like I've been following like your music, Titan, for ages, and even stuff like this, it's kind of intimidating, but I think that it's invigorating at the same time, because it motivates me ultimately to kind of keep making things. So I'd say my kind of antidote for it is to keep making things through it. I know that sounds very basic, but I think like keep creating at any standard, keep creating at whatever pace it is that you need to create, and that you don't realize it, but that is already like combating imposter syndrome, because you're not really succumbing to it. You are using it as fuel to kind of like keep making things. And I think, to some extent, no one's aware of the kind of tension and the kind of doubts and anxieties that go on in your own head. They only see the work you produce. So, like there's been times people have really resonated with something that I was this kind of tortured artist, and they just like, oh, this is really cool. And I'm like, seeing it through their eyes, kind of made me view myself as like, oh, I'm always going to be an imposter to myself. You know what I mean? Because I always have a higher standard for myself, and I'm always going to question whether I belong with the people I admire. But I think that that's a beautiful thing. And I think it's definitely an ongoing process, 100%. And you shouldn't hope to end it, because I think if you ever feel that, right, I've sorted that out, I've achieved peak artistry, I have solved like all my insecurities, that is a false kind of comfort, because you might be complacent. Like you might have gotten complacent. I think you should always be questioning yourself. You should always be looking like to kind of see what you can learn from other people, always improving. Literally every time I do a drawing, for example, it's one of my favorite things about drawing is that it is something I have complete control over, but also it's slightly better each time, in small ways, and I think that will never end. And it's like, as good as I become, there's always someone who's way better than me, and I think I've learned to translate that into motivation, because someone's looking at you like that too. Like someone's looking at you like, oh, like I'll never be as good as you. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. I think the imposter syndrome is something that actually doesn't have to be such a bad thing if you manage it correctly, if you let it fuel you in the right way.
Great answer.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one. Of course, I've definitely experienced imposter syndrome. I think I experience it constantly. A lot of my work is kind of like goes into a lot of my advocacy, right? And people know my advocacy as well as my music. So a lot of the things I say in my art are protest-based stuff and opinion-based stuff. And I think, especially like at the start of my journey or career, if you call it, in both music and advocacy, you have that thought, not just from you, but conversations with friends, where it's like you put yourself in a position where you're not just speaking for you, but you're speaking for other people that look like you. They didn't ask you to speak for them, but you felt like someone needs to say something.
Yeah.
So it's either you have these thoughts a lot where it's like, okay, cool, you're in a position or a space, even a space like this, where you're speaking for someone or other creatives or other black people. But those people didn't ask that. But if you don't say that, that means that no one ever says anything, so nothing's ever said, and things continue as the way they were. So the way I kind of dealt with that was saying, okay, cool, this is just a position we're in. I'm going to do my art. I'm not going to say, cool, I'm not making music, or I'm not going to follow my dreams because I have these fears of people judging it, because then nothing ever gets done and no one's ever in that position and nothing gets progressed. But I'm going to use that imposter syndrome and those thoughts, I'm going to make them something healthy where it works as a checks and balances for me. So if I'm saying something and I'm thinking about imposter syndrome and I'm thinking about what other people would think, I go, that's a good thing. Because that means I have to hold myself to a level of accountability and a level of responsibility where I go, cool, I have to be careful with the things I say. I can't just speak just to speak. It has to be for a reason. It always has to be for a reason, always for a purpose. And I think that keeps me going in the right direction. And it always goes back to that like crucial word, which is authenticity. Do you have to say something? Do you really feel like that? Is this something that you believe in? Is this something that you have like the utmost belief in as well? Not just, okay, cool, I like that thought. Because then if it is, then it's worth saying and it's worth dealing with the consequences that come after, you know, and then you don't have any regret with that. But like I said, you can't hold yourself back from doing what you want to do. So if you want to do film and you're doing film where you're telling your story, but your story also happens to be a shared story to a certain extent between other black people and black folks, or even your writing, then are you going to stop yourself from telling your truth because you go, cool, this is a shared truth to a certain degree? Or are you going to say something because if you don't say something and everyone thinks like that, that means we never have our type of work out there, and then we still have the issue of people not being able to relate with anything because no one ever did anything because we were all scared, you know?
Quick addition to like imposter syndrome and like finding confidence. I think how I do it is I just ask myself, did I try as hard as I could? Did I do, and that's all that I ever want from myself. And I think that's how I find some sort of confidence, is like, if I have put in 100% in a project, that is all I'll ever ask of myself. And that's how I feel better about a project. And because then I'll feel imposter syndrome when I feel like I could have put in a lot more effort, and then everybody's telling me how dope that film is. Then I'm like that's probably one of the worst feelings for me. But if it's a project that I know that I put in 110% and everyone's like, yo, that's whack, I don't like, that's fine. That's fine. I'm still sleeping perfectly that night. And that's, yeah.
Also intention. If your intention's in the right place where you go, cool, I'm doing this for this reason, and you know what the reason is, and you work so you don't forget what that reason is, then you know there was no malice intended within that action, and other people are able to see that, you know? So if you have the right intentions, I feel like just do you, be free to. But if the intention is to harm or is ever similar to that type of stuff, then you go into, okay, cool, the imposter syndrome works in the favor of the people and you shouldn't be doing that. Like I said, checks and balances.
Sorry, just like so many good thoughts from this. Because I think I remember writing, like I've always written, that's one of the mediums that I use to express myself as well. And I have always, just for an example, like I've always written in people always clown me because of the way I speak or the way I write is, to them, I guess not how they anticipate, like, a black girl to speak. We all know the implications of that sort of thing. You know, and it's to this or that. And I remember, like, you know, beginning my whole journey as an artist from when I was like a teen, before that, but I would always get this label of pretentious, right? Like, that's a term that people throw at artists a lot, pretentious. Like, and, you know, the root word of that is obviously pretense. So basically, you know, a pretense is basically, you know, just like giving an impression that isn't authentic, giving an impression that's not genuine, not true. But then I always kind of had this in the back of my head anytime I write something, am I being pretentious? Is this pretentious? And then, but that's so interesting because nobody can really dictate to you what is a pretense to you. You know what I mean? Like, as in, if I'm writing authentically my thoughts, my feelings, my thing, there's only so much extent to which somebody else can call that a pretense. Because it's like, it might not resonate with you, but I'm not. So I think it comes to that core question, like, the times I have felt pretentious, it's like, wait, am I pretending? Am I writing this for someone else? And those are the only times where I'm being genuinely pretentious, is when I've fallen into that trap of maybe falling into the trap of imposter syndrome and trying to be palatable to others, is you do find yourself pretending sometimes, like, wait, hang on, this is Kat, like, what am I, you know? But for the most part, when you create authentically, like what Tig was saying, when you know that you have put like all of your effort into it, you have that sort of confidence and assurance that comes from this core knowledge that I'm not pretending. It's like, I belong here. You know what I mean? Like this, like you have this kind of confidence and self-assurance, which is kind of a complete like contradiction to imposter syndrome. So that's like a really interesting point to throw up.
And it's always like, even if you don't feel like you belong in the space, you know the work that you're bringing is authentic. And if that's the case, then it's always going to be, I just feel like in some sort of way it's going to make you feel as if, like in a way it works like you know you're going to be deserving to be in that space, if that makes sense. But I think a key takeaway from all of this is that all these artists do amazing things and you all experience it. I think that it's important to understand that we all go through it, and at some point you're going to experience that feeling, but I just guess it's like, it's self-doubt, it's part of your journey, and you know, you just keep it moving. I have individual questions for all of you now. Jesse, I'm going to start with you. But you're an illustrator, a writer, a visual artist, and you also do born and bred. So to me, you are literally the epitome of a multidisciplinary artist. You do so much. So I just want to know, did you start off with one medium and then branch off into another one, or do they all align in some way, or are they just all separate?
I find that, I think the longest thing I can remember is my relationship with visual art. My dad is a professor of animation, so my house is filled to the brim with comics and art and everything. So I think just those influences, but that was always just the way that I wanted to express myself. I didn't even think about whether it was, you know, career, like, you know, like options or whatever. I think that more people are multidisciplinary artists than they give themselves credit for. Because I think that if you have that need to express yourself, you're going to eventually you're going to eventually want to do that in whatever medium you can. Not saying that everybody's a writer or everybody's this, like we all have our kind of natural affinities and strengths. But I think that as you pursue any kind of, I'll say creative career, but I think even like any other kind of career, you come into contact with other areas, other branches of that thing, and you kind of can't help but sort of absorb, you know, like I'm not a filmmaker, for instance, but I'm constantly surrounded with photographers and filmmakers, so you know, a little bit of that informs what I do, and all this kind of thing. I think that in terms of managing like the different things, I think for me personally, a degree of separation helps, not in the content, because it's all just doing the same job that I said earlier. Like for me, it's all to serve, like expressing myself and then by virtue reflecting the experiences of other people like me. That's what it all is for. But I think that like in terms of managing it and like in terms of maybe prioritizing certain things at different times, I think I do. It's like I put on a different like head for different tasks. You know, like when I'm doing Born and Bred and me and my brother are kind of coming up with concepts or editing editing videos, it's quite a different process and headspace from when I'm just drawing in my room versus when I'm writing. For instance, like for me, writing is a lot more like raw emotions. Like if I just need to process my own very temperamental emotions, I have to write. Drawing is more controlled. Like drawing is my kind of like catharsis. It's just very methodical and like I know I can control it. And then, you know, editing videos and doing Born and Bred is very collaborative and very like, you know, going out there talking to people, you know, translating what they're saying into this format. So it's all kind of like branches of the same tree. They're like all related and you can see echoes of each thing in everything. But I think that sometimes the way I manage each thing is kind of it's like a different part of me, you know, like they're all different kind of parts of my brain, if that makes sense.
And did you start off as drawing and did you go into something else, or was it all just like a natural flow for you?
So I started like, in terms of, I guess, translating it into a kind of career and wanting to be like an artist full time, I started with art, you know, I started with drawing. And that was what I did, and that's what I shared. And I had no kind of too strong like parameters around what that needed to be. I was just making things and sharing them. And then through that, attracting other people who are in the same field or similar, like adjacent fields, I kind of came into more and more contact with musicians, with photographers, with filmmakers, with writers, and it kind of gave me permission to explore those other sides as well. So I think like I'm very empowered by seeing examples around me. But I think at core I think it can be good to start from what's organic, start from what you find yourself doing when you're not thinking, like what you just need to do, you know what I mean? Like if that's film, then start with that. If it's drawing, if it's music. But it did kind of bleed into like each thing.
I can really relate to that because even just starting with like podcasting and then thinking like, what do I actually like to do? And then I'm like, okay, well I like talking. Pretty much I like talking. So then it's like, you know, from that the talk series comes in. It just kind of like naturally there's a flow of things that come to life. But thanks for that. Titan, this is for you. Sorry. So championing Black culture is, I feel like, at the core of what you do. A lot of the stuff like through your music, but also through your advocacy. And one thing that really stands out to me is how much community is influenced in everything that you do. So I just want to ask you a question about that. Like why is community so important to you? And how does it influence your path and the way you go about your work?
That's a great question. Well, I don't know. I think it just happened innately. I've been in my community like my entire life. It's been in a place where you don't relate to people. You look for people you relate to, and the people I related to in the Western construct and stuff, in Western society, were people that look like me. And then the people that accepted me were people that look like me. So I grew up in my community, and my community started expanding. Like we have this. We have our own individual communities, so you might be Ethiopian, Eritrean, Somalian, Kenyan, Sudanese, South Sudanese. But then we also have this shared community that we're also a part of, which is this Black identity that we have, you know? And I view that as my community. But the reason it became so important to me was because that's what I cared about. That's what I wanted to see do well. And all the histories of our individual nations, the reason we're here is because we had people that wanted better for us, for most of our situations, you know? And that goes into the Sudanese revolution and all that. And I feel like innately, through the sacrifices of my grandfather, all the way to my grandma, all the way to my parents, that succession line of pretty much sacrifices, I am now in this position. So it's been people caring for the next generation, for the kids, for people to look like them. That's the reason I'm still here. So I think innately, just growing up and watching my grandma and her sacrifices for people to look like her sending her money back home, still to her relatives and people that aren't her relatives, but people that have a number and call her and say, hey grandma, I need this, I need this. I know that you might not be doing as well as I think you're doing, but can you please help me out? And then her always being there to help out, always assist. And then me seeing the results of that. So seeing kids that I'll never meet, or in the future, hopefully I will meet, that live in a whole different continent from me.
Yeah.
Kind of knowing them as I'm growing and seeing them as they're growing and hearing about their stories and hearing about their situations becoming better and seeing that that bond that my grandma had with them still, and then how our family developed and how their family developed and how that became a small community that transcends even state lines and oceans. It was very impactful to me as a young person, you know, and me growing up, I started taking on a lot of those responsibilities as a young person as well, you know. So I was like 12, trying to like send money back home for like people and stuff, and that just developed within me, and I just couldn't lose that. Plus, I'm a pretty nosy person. I get into a lot of people's business, you know, and that isn't, I don't know, that doesn't always lead to the best results for me as an individual, but I've noticed that it's put me in a position where I can see people I care about to do something, or when they're in pain and not willing to talk about it. I can see that now, I can see those things, and I can assist. And then seeing them get through that and then get into better positions where they're now doing the same thing with their little brothers or their friends or people that come to them, it's just addictive, you know? So I don't think there's even a reason. I think it's just how I was like brought up.
Yeah, I love that. That's really real too, because even just the stuff, I've seen the stuff that you did with like multicultural arts and just creating that space for young people to come together and like record or just even be in the presence of other people is so important, because like this is community today, you know what I mean? And if it wasn't for community, like it's the foundation of anything. So, you know, it's like we need the support of our community and we need to support our community. So I love that.
Would you bring that up as well? Away from just our direct community and what I saw, a lot of the reasons why I'm even in music is because a lot of it goes to legacy. So someone else's legacy that impacted me that I then inherit. Me just getting into music I wasn't at home and just said, cool, I'm doing music, I'm rapping. Like I never thought I'd be a rapper. Like I don't even think I'm rapping now. When people say you're a rapper, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I do. Right? But that's not what it is. I became a part of like when you're young and when you come over here, they try to get you to be in as many groups as possible and different programs. You have someone come to your house, like some random white person that takes you from your house and takes you to experiences and say, this is straight, Mike. That happened to me and a lot of my cousins, you know? And through stuff like that, I was working, or not even working, I was in programs that were run a lot by councils, by different organizations from young, and they worked to try to get me to assimilate to a different type of culture. That didn't really work out well, but then it plugged me in with resources that I had from a young person, and the positive stuff that I saw other black older people, older women, older men do, I started taking advantage of those resources that were there. So there was a program called Rap 302-1. There was a pretty limited program, but it was a space for me to go to after school. There wasn't a negative type of space when I was at St. Albans, and I could just write poetry, and I could do my poetry, and no one would bother me. If I needed help with something, I could ask for it. And there was Mo and Khaled from a rap group called The Africs, and they've toured the world. They're from Footscray Flats and stuff, and they've had their own story. When they came back, they said, cool, we want to start something in our neighborhood, in our areas, and they joined that program, and that program led to me becoming a musician and going down this path. So now that I'm on this path and I'm able to do the same thing, I do that, you know, and that's their legacy being passed on, you know, and obviously add to it. But that's it.
Thank you. Tig, this is for you. So, you know, you spoke a lot about your films, and I've seen, you know, a few of your films. They're very powerful, especially the most recent one, Cheng.
Yeah.
Shout out, guys, if you haven't checked it out, you need to watch it because that one was really moving. But I want to know what you think makes an effective storyteller.
That's a great question, a really difficult one to answer. What makes an effective storyteller? What makes an effective storyteller is someone who's able to convey a story that has the potential to change someone. And the potential, and being able to change someone is just being able to change the world. It's a bit simple for answer, but I think that's what it is. And I've had films that have changed me, changed how I walk, changed how I move, changed how I interact with people. And that's what makes an effective storyteller. Someone who's able to get all the elements of a story and then also put them out visually and be able to, and I hope positively impact, is what makes an effective storyteller. I guess you can go the opposite way, like Catcher in the Rye, and then inspire mass murderers for a decade. But yeah, that's what makes an effective storyteller. So a story that has the potential to change your DNA.
Yeah, and even if it is just that one person, it's just making an impact. So I like the answer. I'm conscious for time. I have one more question, and I want to do a Q&A. Do you guys have questions? Yeah. Okay. Let's just do questions. Let's do questions. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. This is fine. You do a few. Yeah. Sorry.
Hi guys, thank you for all your responses. They've been really inspirational. Just a question about self-doubt, particularly doubting your own talent. Have you had those thoughts, and how do you overcome them and continue doing what you love and aspire to be better? What is it that allows you to overcome those feelings or thoughts of self-doubt?
Great question. I'm sure we all feel it. As a matter of fact, just a few days ago, I didn't put through an application for a film just because I thought that this story doesn't deserve to be told, and that's sort of the imposter syndrome thing that we're going down, and it will affect me, I'm sure, for the rest of my life. But how I tried to combat that was just what I was talking about in terms of trying my best. And trying my very, very best gives me that, like you said, the core confidence, and that's where I get it from. But I'm sure, and I'm slightly more confident than I was, let's say, 4 years ago in my art form. But yeah, I think and I'm disappointed in myself for not putting through that application the other day. I was thinking to myself, I'm like, you have to be in it to win it.
Yeah.
And what's the worst thing that can happen? Like, you get a no. I've been getting no's for the past 5 years. Like, I send probably 10 emails a week to a production company, yo, here's my show reel. Hey, can I be on set? And I 98% of the time, I don't even get a reply. The other 2%, one is a no, and then the 1%, I've gotten probably 3 yeses for a major project in my whole life, and I've been writing those yeses. If I get I got a yes to be just an attachment role in a feature film, an attachment, and it's riding those little wins, because you have to take a million L's. Oh my gosh. And even when I do take an L, I'm sort of happy about it, because I'm like, okay, that's just one less, I'm just chipping away. I'm just chipping away, because I know there's a number of L's that I have to take in my career until, let's say, I've made it, so I'm like, okay, cool, that's one more down.
No, that's actually so true. I think you have to get quite comfortable and develop quite a relationship with rejection. And I think that you probably learning to reframe what rejection means to you, or even in those moments of self-doubt, not feeling good enough, all of those things, kind of retranslating those in your own head, like, okay, am I not good enough, or am I just improving? Am I just like setting a higher standard for myself? Am I feeling complacent, or do I feel worthless? Because oftentimes when you examine those feelings, they're not as core as they feel. They feel very all-consuming in the moment, like, oh, I'm trash, like, this sucks. But like, I think a lot of the time there are other things, there are other kind of questions, other kind of things your mind's posing, other challenges. I think like the self-doubt thing, I battle with it constantly, but I think that also it sounds a little like, you know, like millennial 2020 kind of thing. I think allow it, like for real, allow those moments, because creativity and happiness and everything, it ebbs and flows. It's not meant to be this consistent state, because otherwise, if it were, you know, like a win would mean as much as an L. You know what I mean? Like L's give wins their significance.
Yeah.
So I think like allow it, like sit with it. Don't necessarily, because sometimes you feel bad, and then you also put this additional pressure on yourself to like. You feel bad for feeling bad. Like, you're like, oh, I'm trash, but I should be better, I should be more confident. I think sometimes just sit with it, and things naturally ebb and flow. Like, things are very seasonal. I think that in terms of coping with it in the moment, that really helps me. And like sitting with it kind of makes it feel less like all-consuming, less permanent. I can recognize, you know what, this is a state that I'm in. I'll consume more art tomorrow, and I'll probably feel better tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah.
You are juggling so much and doing so much, but also trying to follow your passion and your drive, and you're driven by, you know, the cause and your skills and your talents, but how do you juggle being a creative or working in the creative field, but also trying to, you know, hold down a full-time job, or, just juggling those two things? I guess that's my question. Thank you.
It's difficult, but I'm not even gonna lie to you. It was a good part of like last year, and even like parts of this year, where I really got to know oats and tuna. Honestly, I guess to that point where it's like, but the reason we continue is our love for it, is our passion. Since a lot of our like industries, especially our involvement in our industry, and I say our in terms of like black people, and just migrants and people with different cultures, our involvement in these industries, it's new. There's a lot of like structural things that are not there and are not in place, which is why we're not getting paid. You know, like I speak to artists all the time in terms of music, where I go, cool, a producer is gonna struggle to get paid, or an engineer is gonna struggle to get paid, because your pay depends on artists doing well. And the artists you work with are people of color, and the system and the structure here isn't set in a way that we're able to have an economy that's effective, where artists are getting paid properly for the shows that they're doing, or running enough shows to get the money and generate that back into the ecosystem of art. It's gonna take time to develop, and I'm not gonna lie to you, it's gonna be tough, but if you have that passion there, and this is something that you want to do, you know that there's nothing else in the world that you wanna do. You can't see yourself in 10 years or 12 years, and be honest with yourself, you can't see yourself in 10 or 12 years doing something else, and this is the field you wanna be in, then understand that there's gonna be sacrifices that need to be taken. But also in saying that, a lot of the work that we are involved with, there's avenues for pay that you have to ask, and you have to have these conversations, and you have to develop your business acumen to the point where you're able to have those discussions and make sure you're not doing something that you don't want to do for less money than you want to receive, you know? If you're ever doing something and you're willing to take a pay cut, make sure it's something that you want to do, something that's important to you. If it's not something you want to do, evaluate that and either come back to the negotiation table and go, cool, I want to do this, I'm not that invested in it really, let's have a conversation about increasing my wages because I don't think this is fair, and either secure that. If you don't have that time and that self-worth to be, okay, cool, I can walk away from this, and walk away from it, you know? I feel like if more of us walk away from these BS like contracts and stuff, then people will start understanding our value, but we have to do that like collectively.
I am very much still figuring this question out. I think like, For me, I think there's a lot of power in, like, I've realized that kind of being a creative person and an artist for its own sake is quite a different thing from being an artist as a career. It's like, obviously, the core drive is the same, but there's a whole sort of another ecosystem and language that I think young artists don't realize exists, we're not really exposed to. I'm speaking out of experience. Like, I think that kind of learning that language and sort of learning the conventions of career artistry is really important. And like through me, it's been through like, I've gone out to like gigs, I've put myself out there, and I've kind of tried to cultivate like friendships and just surround myself in, not just because it's fun and not just because it inspires me, which it does, but also because it kind of gives you a very critical understanding of, oh, what's the name of that thing? You know what I'm saying? Like a lot of the time as artists, we are doing things that we don't realize has a name and therefore has a career path. Do you know what I mean? Like, and learning that language and learning the format in which like what we do like can be paid is important, because that language, like even how you just described me as like a multidisciplinary artist, right? Yeah. I was not aware of that term until 2 days ago, and in literally learning that term, which I learned through volunteering, I was like, oh, okay, this is a thing, and now I can look for kind of opportunities using that term, and I'm not just sort of like blindly like taking random stuff.
Which is like our biggest like barrier, I guess, is we don't actually know what exists. We don't know what exists, and we don't have the sort of technical like language and sort of like formulas around it. You know what I mean? And I think also like be very careful with your time, sort of like what Titan touched on. As an artist, it's that really fine line between like expressing yourself and like but also being paid, and that's a fine line. People can exploit that. People can consider your time to be an asset. Learn to think of your time, your creativity, your output as an asset, and you don't just sort of throw those out loosely. So if you are giving away free time, let it be an opportunity that's enriching, or you're learning from, that you're like curating useful relationships, not just sort of like for clout's sake, being out and about for no reason. I think that your free time and your like unpaid time, if it's feeding back into you in some way, it will eventually translate into monetary like gain, if that makes sense.
Dance.
I'm just going to say, obviously I feel very similar to you too. And just one thing I think maybe has been touched on, I think it's, when it comes down to art form and money, and I think one thing maybe young artists may not do is respect their art form enough. As in, I don't think you should ever do anything for free if it results in, if you're doing it for someone, it results in them making money. So if it's a brand that's asking you to do something, it's like, okay, so why should I draw this shoe for you if you plan on selling that shoe? Exactly, and I'm not getting paid, because then that's nonsense. But if it's for the culture, then I'm always down to do something for free. And that's how I look at my video projects. You know, if someone asks me, hey, I've written this story and it means so much to me, I'm more than happy to give my time. But if someone's like, hey, I want to make an ad, why? You want me to make an ad so you can sell something, right? Exactly, like that's the whole, even if you're a small business, like you're a business, and I'm providing a service. But also what I was originally talking about is respecting your art form, in which it takes 10, I think minimum sort of 10 years to sort of get to a point where you're like, that is my rent money, my bills money. And if you've been doing something for a year, 2 years, and it's also got to, also this goes on like the quality of your work. You know, you do something like 2-3 times, you're not too happy about it. It's like, who do you think you are? Like, who do you think you are that you can just do this thing 2 times and you can be that person? You can be Barry Jenkins, or you know, you can. It's I think we also need to sort of think about that too. You know, it's like really respecting it. You got these people that you look up to. They've done their 10,000 hours. So why shouldn't you?
Yeah.
You know, even for you to be so upset at yourself, like, who are you? Like, you know.
One more thing.
Is there another question?
There is, but I think one person has to answer it because we have to wrap up.
Okay.
Sorry.
Are we?
Yes.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Okay. So.
Is it?
Can you guys hear me now? Okay. So my question is mostly like the thing that I struggle with is the imposter syndrome, where I doubt myself, but it also kind of translates to me to do better in my work and stuff like that. So what sort of activities or who do you guys revert to that will help you get through those emotions, I guess, or the struggle of, you know, I guess, like for example, motivation. I struggle. I'm like, I'm not great at my job, or what I'm doing is not really that great. Or if I look at someone else that actually inspires me, I'm like, I think I can do that. Maybe I can try. But if it becomes too difficult, and then that impulsive syndrome takes, you know, and then I'll get trapped in it. What sort of activities do you guys do, or who do you look up to that actually gets you out of that funk? Is my question.
I'm going to just say, honestly, I think it's having a collaborator. I think collaboration is beautiful. And I've got like his name's on the back of my phone, Jesse Lane. Here, he's my rock. You know, and that's how I deal with it, by talking to somebody else, and somebody else like, I back your idea. Then I just feel so much better about it. And I think just talking to someone, whether it's boyfriend, girlfriend, best friend,
Also, comparing yourself to others is sometimes disastrous. Like, you know, you're not someone else, you're you, and that's enough, that's special, that's worth a lot. You have to understand that, you have to remember that. It's not about looking at something and go, cool, the way I do it isn't as good as this person, right? Because you don't know how much hours that person put into it, or how much stuff that they had to deal with, or even they might feel the same way as you feel. It's about looking at your work and go, cool, what can I add that's me and that's different, so I can do it in the way that I do it, and then continue to do that. And with your work, look at other people that are consuming your work and talk to them and talk to why are they consuming your work. Because if you're doing something and other people are appreciating it, they're appreciating it for a reason. And sometimes you forget because you're so caught up in doing your stuff and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And living here, we have to become hustlers. Like even in creativity, you can't just be your creative. Yeah, you can't just be a creative person because you will starve. You have to learn how to hustle, you know? Which means we forget sometimes. So look at the people that are consuming your work or people that are appreciating you and ask them, why do you like this? And they'll explain to you. And sometimes those moments will give you enough energy and enough fuel to go for the next 2 years. Like I often get a lot of messages and I look at those messages and I go, cool, I don't feel like doing this today, but I remember why I do this, you know? Yeah.
That's a big one as well, because sometimes you only look at, I don't know, you feed into that doubt, but you don't realize there's so many people that are supporting you and you kind of just, you know, look over that. But also acknowledge your wins and how far you've come. Like don't forget, you know, I did this and now look at me, I'm like facing a new challenge. So just remember that. But yeah, we're gonna wrap it up here, guys. Thank you so much for coming. You guys just spoke amazingly the whole time. So just wanna give a round of applause.